As we wrap up National Indigenous Peoples Month, we here at Context thought it would be a good time to sit down with some leaders in the community to hear their thoughts on the status of Indigenous people in 2020, covering off on topics from COVID-19, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, police interaction, and the $1.3 billion given to Indigenous communities since March, and of course, the Sixties Scoop reparations. Joining me today is Stephen Carleton, president of the Bill Prankard Evangelistic Association, and Stephanie Joy Styres, president of Marketplace Solutions Incorporated and from Six Nations. Thanks for joining us both today.
Thank you
for having us.
I want to start off with talking about COVID-19. And as we've seen since March, the federal government has given quite a bit of money to Indigenous communities, First Nations communities, reportedly $1.3 billion, as I said. Where is this money going? First of all, maybe I'll start off with, do the communities feel like they're receiving this money and that it's going to the things that it needs to go to? Maybe I'll start with you, Stephanie.
Well, in my community, I live in Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. And basically what we find is the government always gives funding, but there's always strings attached, meaning there's criteria that you have to follow. They don't ever ask us, what do you need the money for? So it would be nice if they would ask, and then we could implement what we need the money for. Like for us, we closed down our borders. It was called Operation Protect Our Elders, so that, you know, our elders would not experience the COVID-19 illness. And it cost a lot of money to have those borders covered with security. So I'm not even sure if that was one of the funding criteria that we could use the money for, was security. But that would be a big thing that we would need it for. I know, you know, buying millions of dollars of PPE equipment or billions, you know, yeah, seems outrageous. But it, you know, as long as we can use the money for what we need it for, I'm for it. Have we received it? We've received some. We've also received some money for businesses and people who are not eligible for, you know, the other government funding that's out there.
Right. That's a great point. I mean, in the last announcement made by the Indigenous Affairs Minister, he did indicate that money would be going to building 10 shelters in 5 years in First Nation communities. Money would be committed to bringing in nurses into community, as well as PPEs. What are your thoughts on that, Stephen? Have you seen the money go towards these important things, or do you agree with Stephanie that it should be decided by the individual communities where the money should go?
Yeah, I think it is really quite a broad issue, because in Canada there's well over 1,000 reserves and Indigenous communities. In Nunavut, where the predominant amount of our ministry and work takes place, there's 25 communities. There have been and then continue to be no cases of COVID-19. So yeah, when this whole virus kicked up, I mean, borders were shut down, travel, you know, planes, everything canceled. If someone is traveling to the territory traveling to the territory, you have to self-quarantine for 2 weeks before flying there, and then 2 weeks when you land. So how that all breaks down, I'm not sure. I think protecting these our peoples is really the main priority, but how that breaks down, yeah, it's perhaps more difficult to see where it's being spent than we would initially think.
Stephanie, I've heard, it might have been in our conversations prior to this, from the Six Nations perspective, this is really seeing an uprise of young leaders really taking leadership and taking care of the elderly as well in the midst of this pandemic. Am I correct with that?
Yes, actually the whole community has stepped up. They've said, we're all in this together, and let's do things where we can help each other, right? To be safe, especially the elders. So a lot of times we'll go to the community members and find out who needs what. So only one person will go into the city, bring groceries back and distribute it. Free water was given out here on the community. Our chief done that. He had the free water there. food for people who needed it, reduce bills like gas bills, hydro bills, those types of things, rent. So you reduce the rent, or in some cases, they didn't even have to pay rent, people on the Six Nations, if they were part of the housing of Six Nations. So that the chief and council owned, like the Six Nations community owned. So if they were in that housing, and even some of the people who have apartments here would say, okay, it's okay to forego your rent because of what's going on. A lot of the employers laid off staff here on Six Nations, but continued to pay them, which is like awesome. You know what I mean? Like, so I think it was the whole of Six Nations pulling together, youth, elder, everybody, and saying, what can we do? Because we're all in this together. How can we help each other, right?
Well, let's move on to another serious topic, and that is missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The federal government also announced that they are delaying an action plan to address this issue. It's only been a year since the filing of the national report into the inquiry, and they've said that they're delaying it because of COVID, because of the pandemic. How do you feel, Stephanie, knowing that we continue to delay the process of this inquiry, or of just the investigation and the next steps into finding these women or finding out what happened to them?
I think this report has been contentious since it even started, you know, gathering the facts. There was contention there. People would walk away from it because I don't know if it was just because they were thinking we're just going to do this report, get it over with, and say we've done it. When really, when the report was said and done, Canada was charged with genocide. That's strong. That's, I mean, wow. And, you know, so I think a delay in funding or restitution in what's owed, we've seen it all the time. We're used to it as an Indigenous person. I think the greater society is educated on our issues, they can step up to the plate too, and they can write letters and say, you know what, we need to move forward with this. We need to move forward. The technology is here. They could still continue business as usual over technology such as Zoom to host these meetings, to, you know, there's online banking. There's all kinds of ways to address this issue, but you need to want to do it. You know, the government chooses what they want to do or what they don't want to do, or what they just don't respond to. So you have to ask yourself, why is that their response?
Yeah. As a father of almost 5 girls, and you're raising young Indigenous women, what are you telling your daughters if the world, I mean, I think about this raising 2 young Black boys. While the world might say one thing, how do you reiterate that they do have meaning, that they do have purpose?
Yeah, I mean, again, it has to be Christ focused. So if I were to purely base or teach my girls that their worth as individuals is on what I can give them, or what a society can give them, or anything like that, I think we're always going to come up short. Like even me as their father, as the person who perhaps loves them most in their lives, next to, you know, their mother, we still come up short. But when our value is placed in God, I think God really, number one, speaks to the value that he placed in our lives, which was giving up his own child for them. And then equally so, I think God helps us overcome things that might be, you know, against us or very hard to deal with. So that's kind of our philosophy on raising our daughters.
As we talk about identity, let's move to just police interaction. As we've seen in the news recently, I just feel like almost every week we're hearing stories. We've, you know, of course, we're very familiar with Chantel Moore's story of allegedly dying at the hands of the Edmundston police. Of course, the story of the Inuk man being kind of knocked down by the RCMP officer as he opened his car door. Chief Alan Adam being violently arrested. Rodney Levi. The list can go on and on and on here in this country. Stephanie, what is the interaction like when it comes to your community and the police? Is there trust? Can there be trust?
That's a great question. I don't believe there is a lot of trust. Like, you need to work on your relationship, right? There needs to be relationship building between Indigenous people and the police. They need to learn our culture, like be culturally sensitive, because there's a high number of our people in the judicial system. Should they be there? Questionable, right? Were they set up? I don't know, because, you know, I talk with a lot of non-Indigenous people who are pulled over and they're given a second chance, or sometimes multiple chances. So my thing is, well, why is it when we're pulled over, the book, like the whole book or whatever they call it, is thrown at us? Like, is that fair? Right? So I think when we're thinking about the police, they need to take a step towards us as well, to create that relationship. And I'm looking on Facebook and I see some really great police out there, you know, saying I love you to different ones and I'm here for you. That's wonderful. But, you know, it needs to be, the whole police force needs to be transformed in that manner. And I know that legislations and policies in the police department change. However, what they're taught coming into the system, that doesn't change because it's passed down, right? That culture is passed down from one generation of police to the next, to the next, to the next. So are they really enforcing and putting in place the new policies and legislation, or are they just teaching them the old way, right? And it's coming now into the future. We need a change. That's what's happening. People are not going to put up with it anymore, especially people of color. We're not going to, we can't. Too many lives are at stake. Too many people are dying. Too many people are thrown in jail unjustly. So something needs to be done.
I want to end with 60s Scoop. As I said recently, we sat down with a survivor of the 60s Scoop, and we're seeing reparations start to come out this past month. People are slowly starting to get their checks. I asked Jennifer Allen if she thought money was enough. And of course, like any victim, that, you know, it's not enough. It will never be enough. But she spoke of acknowledgement and she spoke of an apology. Is that what needs to happen, Stephen? Is there this desire to actually own it? She says much like many other atrocities that we've seen, be it the residential schooling, there was an official apology. Does that need to happen?
Yeah, and I think absolutely. Anytime you have that type of legislation passed that impacts the lives of not only the initial victims, but the kind of the residual effects of the schooling there, apologies, absolutely. And I think, you know, we've seen a number of steps taken that way. And I think that absolutely is part of the way forward. The thing that kind of got me through, because I was abused at 16 years old, and it was by a person who was more or less on kind of church leadership. There just came a point in my life where I needed to say, you know, God, help me through this pain. And I haven't seen this person in 12 years now. But it was a couple years into really drinking and finding myself scared of what my future would look like. Turning to Christ and saying, you know, help me with this pain. Jesus said, look, forgiveness has to be a part of this conversation then. And if that's any broad stroke that we can generalize here, is that 100% there has to be apologies, 100% there has to be some form of dialogue there. But I think equally so, maybe there's a conversation to be had here where we've got to find it in ourselves to forgive. Yeah. It's a big ask, but in my life, you know, it made a world of difference.
Yeah. Stephanie, I want to end with you as we look at, you know, just everything that's happening within the Indigenous scope in Canada. What are your thoughts when it comes to moving forward? I think 2020 has become this watershed moment for many communities in just highlighting the injustice that they face. What is your hope that like, what happens next? How do we transition? How do we pivot? How do we move towards healing?
I think, like I said before, the number one thing is relationship, right?
Yeah.
Like we're talking about this forgiveness, and we're talking about, does an apology need to be made? Yes, for sure, an apology needs to be made, an authentic apology, not just apology for the sake of appeasing the people or apologize. Do you know what I'm saying? Like when Harper apologized in June 11th, 2008, right? 2008. There was a lot of people who said he apologized, but was it sincere, right? You need to think about that. Is it sincere? How do we move forward? Well, we need to have true and legitimate relationships. You need to want to know about Indigenous people. You need to want to know what we want for ourselves, and we need to make our own decisions. And we need to know that our jurisdiction on our land is our jurisdiction. If we say no to pipelines, or we say no to globalization, or whatever's pushing our buttons, if we say no, then no means no, right? Too many times we allow these people to come in, whether it's like Grassy Narrows, where now they're fighting, their people have all kinds of cancer because a big corporation came in, start making tons of money, polluted the water, and now here we are. So what do? We need restitution. The government needs to step in and resolve that situation. You cannot let these people continue to die and have cancer, and their quality of life is diminished because the government says, well, we're not going to do anything, right? We have to look at our Indigenous people and know we're valued, know we're important, know we contribute, right? Know that we know what the environment needs, how we care for Mother Earth, how we care for each other, how we love each other, how we move forward as a people with our traditional teachings. Everything's there to teach us life skills that we can use and that we use every day. That was torn from us through the residential school and these other atrocities, failed government policy. It was torn from us. Now we need it back.
You've touched on so many other topics that we could delve into, but we have gone over our time. But thank you. I think that's well said. Well said. The conversation continues. And one of the things I think that's missing in the relationship is honor, and is holding up that honor for both sides. So thank you again, Stephen Carleton and Stephanie Joy Styres, for joining us today on Context. Hey everyone, thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing. And let us know what you think about today's topic right there in the comments.